Looks good. So I'm going to just start talking because today we are chock full of amazing information. Something that I want you all to kind of understand up front is we are going to go over, and I'm not going to even have to beg you or ask you, because you're going to be so enthralled, and I know you are because Julius has that effect. Shameka and Julius, they're going to take you through the NBI and the Know-ism, and it's an amazing exercise that's going to have far-reaching effects on what you think about yourself and how you think of others. So, but before that, we also have an amazing guest. Nandini will go through her presentation this morning. I'm going to allow Nandini to introduce herself to you so we can go ahead and get started. Nandini, take it away.
Hello, guys. Just wave if you can't hear me or if there are any audio issues, please. But really excited to meet you guys, meet all of you today. I'm Nandini DasGupta. I was fortunate enough to be a part of this last year's Ad Club's fellowship class, where I had the pleasure of working with Erica and Maya, and also Shameka, and so a lot of other partners that you guys, I'm sure, have been hearing from over the last few weeks or so. And honestly, I've been hearing a lot about the program that you guys are in. I think it's really impressive on two fronts. First and foremost, obviously, big shout out to the Ad Club for putting together an opportunity like this in what is obviously a very dire and crazy phase of our lives. But then also shout out to you guys for taking advantage of an opportunity like this. I know it's really, I'm sure a lot of you guys had different visions of what the summer of 2020 was going to be. Probably a lot more beaches and a different kind of internship experience. But you've taken this kind of situation that we're in, and I think it's great that you're turning it into a wonderful experience for yourself. With that, I'm going to kind of jump in. Just want to let you guys know, please feel free to ask any questions that you guys may have. You can use the chat bot. You can use, you can just raise your hand or wave your hand. I'm sorry. And we'll figure it out. I'll also make sure to pause every so often for questions. So there will be opportunities for you to ask them. Cool. So today I'm going to talk about getting the job, which I'm sure has been on your mind a lot lately. And, you can read a lot of different articles and blogs and talk to a lot of people, listen to a lot of people, myself included. What I'm going to talk to you guys about, though, today is taking all of those different things that you've read about and heard about and how it can really kind of come into practice and you can make it your own. So a bit about me and just kind of what I've done and or been doing. My background, so I've worked in a lot of different places and in different roles. I've been working in marketing for about 10 years now. Started at a technology company called iMation, and that was my first job out of college, which we'll talk about in a bit. And then I had a chance to work actually in content management at a sports media company. Spent quite a bit of time working in brand marketing and management at General Mills, and then more recently moved over to the digital side of things. So spent about 3 years at an agency, Acknowledged Digital, working on client strategy. And now I'm in research and consulting, specifically for digital marketing leaders at Gartner. So that's my background. That's kind of my resume. But a lot has happened to me kind of even getting up to this point. A lot of it happened actually back when I was sitting in your guys' shoes. So the reason why I was happy to kind of speak about this is because I can relate to a lot of what you guys are going through. I changed my major 3 times, which set me behind a bit. And as far as graduating, as such, my GPA was only okay, and I graduated during a recession. So I definitely know what it feels like to graduate during a really terrible job market when things feel dire, and you're really not sure what a job looks like, let alone a career. I graduated with a major that didn't necessarily quite align exactly with what I wanted to do. And the things that the major did set me up for, I kind of hated. I did not want to be an accountant. But back then, that's where they wanted to put econ majors. I was a working student, which meant, and I actually worked year round, which actually meant I had 0 internships under my belt, which I know some of you guys, just starting out on the internship track, you guys can relate to. And you know what? Kind of most importantly, I'll admit I'm still not in my dream job. There are things about what I do that I like, but we're going to talk later. It's a marathon. I'm still hustling. I'm still working, and everything that I'm going to talk to you guys about, I'm constantly putting into practice for myself, no matter what job I'm in. So how did I get there? So this is a bit of our agenda. So we're going to start off with the basics that I'm going to breeze through because I'm sure you guys have heard them, read them. We still got to talk about them. And then I'm going to talk through a lot of those things that I mentioned before that you've probably heard about, how you can get creative in your job hunt, the best ways to do your homework and how impactful that is, what you should do when, you see what looks like a dream job, but you're not sure if your resume actually tells that story for you. And then how you can kind of bring it all together and build your brand, especially over years of experience and everything that you've done up until this date. So on the basics front, these are gonna feel obvious, but I would be remiss if I didn't say it. You definitely gotta put in the time. It is a bit of a running joke that isn't that funny that, job hunting can be a job in itself. You're going to find yourself putting in a lot of time searching for jobs, writing cover letters, networking, and it is a bit of a numbers game where it feels a little like the lottery where you're going to have to do a lot, and at the end, you're only going to take one job offer, but you still have to really put in that time. Tightening up your resume, and you keep iterating on this. So what I would say here is, your peers, your mentors, your network, it's all a gift, especially when it comes to your resume. I'm constantly sending my resume to my friends, old colleagues, old mentors, just to get their feedback and continue to iterate on that, because as soon as you have it down once, it still can always get better. I was really fortunate to learn about the value of a really strong resume at a young age, and I really believe that that's helped me come in strides, especially because I know there are very few colleges still to this day that actually teach some of those business skills and teach you what it means to write a resume, and degree programs. And so this is something that you're going to have to kind of learn on your own, but there are resources and there are people to help you there. Same goes with interview prep. So I can't stress this enough either. You're going to want to plan and prepare even when you're not actively interviewing. That's, I think, a big mistake that a lot of people make is wait until they have their interview on the books and then they only give themselves like 2 days to prep. Find opportunities where you can do mock interviews with your friends. I know that doesn't sound that much fun, but you can do it in lieu of game night one night and feel just as productive. And it will go a long way. It's going to help you feel more comfortable from a public speaking point of view, from telling your story, and also just help you learn a little more about yourself and your friend who's probably in the same boat as you. And then LinkedIn and getting your brand down, those are two actually kind of come hand in hand. LinkedIn and social media in general is a gift right now. And these are things that did not exist when I was starting my job hunt. But you have an opportunity to put yourself out there, even if it isn't a paper resume now. You have a chance to make an impact and have a voice, especially about topics that are interesting to you. That can be either in the career that you're looking to be in, or even just something you're passionate about. I'm sure a lot of you have noticed LinkedIn has turned into a place where people, myself included, are becoming more vocal, especially about diversity, inclusion, and equity, and just kind of overall societal issues. And you have an opportunity to use that platform to showcase yourself as a professional, but also as a human being and as somebody who is passionate and has a voice that isn't just reposting and or liking or retweeting something. You have an opportunity to actually use that as your own and ultimately showcase your brand. And this is one where you guys may have gone through this training, but if not, they have? Okay. Yeah, so you already know the basics about getting that down. That's another one that you're still going to iterate on. You know, mine changed a few times the last couple of years. But when you are telling your story in your interviews, when you're writing it on your resume, you want that down. You don't want to be confused about who you are. You can be confused after the fact. That happens to me too, but you want to be able to have that down and be able to tell that story. Okay, so getting creative. So the way I'm going to talk through this, guys, in the next few slides, is actually going to tell you about how I've taken these into practice. So like I said, my very first job out of college was at iMation at a technology company. And I had very little technology experience. I had a lot of technology interest. And I also graduated during the recession. So it wasn't looking like there were a ton of good jobs out there. Now, when I was job hunting, I just started, I came across a job posting that was called the Technology Trend Research Intern. It was technically a non-traditional internship. And I read through it, found it really interesting. And when I got to the job requirements, it said that they were favoring people with engineering degrees and hard science degrees, basically technology degrees, which, like I said, I didn't really have. The very last line of that said that business degrees will be considered. Like, okay, I've got an econ degree, so at least I'm not totally out of the woods, but how do I make myself stand out as somebody who is really passionate about technology? This is before social media, like you could really use social media as a platform. And so I really didn't know what to do. Well, as it so happens, the year before, I had written a term paper specifically about technology trends for one of my econ classes. It was a macro econ class. And I just thought, you know what? I got a really good grade on it, so I guess it was well written. Why don't I throw that in there instead of a portfolio or a cover letter? You know, I have my resume, but why don't I do something like that? I did, and that's actually what stood out. I was able to show that, okay, you know, my resume shows kind of those technical skills and the coursework that I've done. This paper tells them that I know what I'm talking about when we're talking about technology trends. So this is really where you got to be creative, especially if you feel like you're in a situation where you don't know where you can stand out. There are many ways that you can. In my case, I shared my relevant coursework. There are other ways that you can do this. I've had friends who've actually pulled together a portfolio of their social media posts, really to show kind of the kinds of statements and the creative twists and lenses that they're taking to issues and or the topics that interest them to make themselves prevalent. So when you hear about attaching a portfolio, it doesn't have to be the portfolio book that you've heard of a lot. And it doesn't also have to be like your own website, especially if you don't have that kind of coding experience to create one. You can really get really creative with how you position yourself as someone right for the role. So this is where I'm going to pause. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to speak up. And then if not, I'm going to move on to the next thing.
Hey, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Olga. Go ahead. Okay. So I have a question. As someone in strategy, a lot of the times we don't have portfolios, or even if we do, they're like very non-traditional. I know a very good strategist who has his Twitter as his portfolio. So how do you convey that creativity with while making sure that you sort of for HR make the process easier by giving them those tick marks to tick off?
Yeah.
How do you do that if you have like a non-traditional portfolio in the form of a Twitter or TikTok or some other social media presence?
Yeah, so fortunately, it's a great question. Fortunately, it's a lot easier to upload rich media now than it was a few years back. So if the platform that they give you allows, like the actual like HR platform where you're submitting everything, gives you a chance to actually upload rich media like JPEGs and or HTML5 or any other rich media like that, then that's easy, right? Then you can actually upload videos. If not, what I would recommend is, say their standard template is a PDF or Word doc. I would recommend creating a document that actually, you have an intro about why you're taking this approach, because you feel like your Twitter or your TikTok, like you said, really showcases your brand, and you append the relevant links. It does create a little bit of work for the person on the other side to click through, or screenshots if that's a little easier to click through. But it's really important to first frame up with a really strong intro about why you're taking that approach, why your Twitter says these things about you. And then you can actually just drop it into a document format. And that way it's there, it can be in that placeholder for the portfolio or in the placeholder for a cover letter. And that's a really great way to make a statement. But I would say that it is harder, but there are ways to do that. And I actually think by taking those steps of doing something creative like that, you're actually showing your creative approach as well, right? They say something like create a portfolio. Well, if you don't have a traditional portfolio, like you said, then you're going to be creative with what you think a portfolio is. So that in itself is a great way to show that. Olga, I think that was your name, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Hi, how are you? What's the best way to follow up with someone after you said network, LinkedIn, and stuff like that? So I send in a message, right? Someone I admire, say like, hi, I love your job and stuff, and I like what you do. They say, okay, thank you, blah, blah, blah. Yep. So what's the best next step? How to be the most natural, organic, and because that's what I'm struggling with.
Yeah.
I don't want people to think that I just need something from them. I just want to connect and, stay in touch.
Well, the fact that you're asking the question shows that you're cognizant about that. So fortunately, it's not like you're trying to be fake, right? You know that you're not being a fake person, and you're actively trying to avoid that. What I would say is, you can try to be specific with your message when you're following up, right? You can say something along the lines of, hey, I've done this actually recently. I really admire what it is that you do, would love to connect on LinkedIn or even in a Zoom call or a Zoom coffee chat, to actually hear more and talk more. Now the next thing there though is just getting an understanding from that person on their availability. And if they can, if they do say that they can, and sure, really happy to do so, then you can come back with specific time frames. And you don't want to be too pushy, but being specific shows that you're on top of it. And I think that's really important too, right? it isn't just that you're like, oh, okay, I'll wait for you, that other person to take the next step. You actually want to show that you're on top of it. You're being specific. You'll be patient, and so you'll be completely understanding and patient. And if that means like you're not talking until next month, give that option, right? And I think that is absolutely fair. And then if it doesn't seem to be going anywhere, kind of the very last step that I sometimes will take is one of two things, actually. You can use LinkedIn to find a peer to that person and see if, and kind of go through that same process and see if they'd be open to speaking with you and, or more responsive and more receptive. Or you kind of you can close out that chain with, hey, I know we haven't been able to connect, totally understand that it's due to availability and whatnot. If you do have anybody else in your circle or network that you think I could benefit from talking from, that would be super helpful as well. That way, you know, you're showing that you still care, even if you feel like you're getting kind of snubbed or ghosted by the other person.
And what to do in a couple months. Okay, so you had a conversation and you talked and you connected. It was great conversation, but everybody's busy and stuff. How do you follow up in a couple months? You just say, hey, I'm just checking. How are you doing?
Yeah, well, that's actually a great one, especially in our current climate. I think how are you doing goes a long way nowadays. I think what's something else that can be really interesting is if you say you've been following that person's work or things done by the brand, you can also take that approach, right? So say you talked to somebody 3 months ago and then now more recently you find out that their team or their company worked on this really cool campaign and you just want to hear more about that. You can use that as your openings. Like, hey, saw this campaign, I saw this commercial that you guys worked on, and I really liked it for these reasons and would just love to learn more about that process. I think if you can, again, find something specific to tie that to, that's really important and really impactful, or something. And if you don't have something like that you can kind of latch onto, then it could be saying, you know, I'm going through a few of these things and would love your opinion on that, and go that route as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. Cool. No other questions? I will continue. Okay, so next thing on doing your homework. So I know some of these sound very basic, but I promise I'll be a little more specific. So when I started interviewing for my role at General Mills, it was extremely stressful, not gonna lie. I'm from Minnesota originally, and back in Minnesota, General Mills is kind of the holy grail. It's considered one of the hardest companies to interview for, and they're super selective. Now, fortunately, I knew some people who knew some people. So as soon as I started to get a line of sight to what the process was going to be for myself as far as interviewing, I started to put in a lot of time towards that. So now that also goes back to that original thing about putting in time, where I had multiple mock interviews with friends and even family members who had no idea what on earth I was talking about, but I just gave them a list of questions and said, hey, I need your help with this. I actually worked through something called the STAR method. I'm not sure if you've heard about this, but the STAR method is a way that you can approach specifically behavioral interview questions and really outline what your story is for that in a very well-organized way. So say you're being asked, oh, tell me about a time where you faced a challenge and led a team. The STAR method takes you towards the situation, the task, what actions you took, and what was the result. And that way you can tell a really well-rounded story for all of those questions. Now, if you look online, you can find a list of 100 or more behavioral questions. And what I actually did, what I would recommend folks do if they have the bandwidth to do so, is take a look at those questions and actually start to write those out even before you have an interview on the books, because eventually you will. And it will be great to have already had all of your thoughts, all of your stories really well organized and written out for you. So then you just have to kind of look back at your script and practice that, going back to practice. And then the last thing is research. And again, this may seem obvious, but it is so important, and it's important to actually be creative with your research. You can and of course should look at what brands or what your prospective employer is doing, how they're performing on the business side. I think more recently, it's increasingly important to show that you understand what they're doing in society and in the community, and help actually you can use that to help you round out why you want to work there. And I think that's really what's important. You're almost always going to get the question of, why do you want to work at this company? And you don't necessarily just want to say, oh, you're a super successful company and I want this job. You want to show that you have values that align to the company, what the company is doing. You have values that align to the team and what they're doing. So the more research that you can do about the company, the team, about the campaigns and or projects that you're going to work on, the type of work, their competitors, all of these things will be incredibly important. When I walked into my General Mills interview, I had rehearsed dozens and dozens of behavioral questions using the STAR method. I had also researched all of the different product lines that I personally had a lot of passion for, and then also crafted responses to talk about the product lines that I did not like and I thought were actually awful, just so I could feel comfortable having those conversations and being honest going to that conversation. So any questions on this? If not, I'll continue. Okay, so this is actually one of my more favorite things to talk about. So like I said, over the last 3 or 4 years, I've been working specifically in digital. And in 2016, I decided to make the leap from brand marketing to looking at agency and specifically digital roles, despite the fact that I had zero digital experience. And I was honest about that. I was not going to lie on my resume about having like Google Analytics or Facebook ad experience, because that's something that you can get called out on very easily and fired for. So I was very honest about the fact that I didn't. But then when I started to have conversations, what I realized is I needed to position myself in a way that I amplified all of my soft skills so well that they forget that I was missing digital experience. Because really, a lot of those things could be taught. And I was one of the first people to say that I'm a fast learner. I will hustle through all of the trainings that you give me, but I'm a very well organized person. I'm a fantastic project manager. I'm a great public speaker. I know the brand side in and out. These are all things that you need desperately at your company that I'm ready to bring. And I can get the trainings even before I even start if you want me to, but don't use my not having those check boxes on my resume as a reason not to talk to me. And so that's really what happened. I was hired by Acknowledge Digital, and I did exactly that. I started day one really showcasing what I knew to do and what I knew I could do, and also spent a lot of time working on building up those technical skills. And really what I want to focus on most importantly is that last bullet. So I didn't end up working for this agency or this employer, but I had an interview once and it really stuck out to me. It was a very similar experience where they knew that I didn't have the direct experience that they had listed on their LinkedIn, on their job profile or LinkedIn. And I knew that. But the employer said specifically this, that he was a firm believer that you hire somebody not for the things that they've done and or can do, but for their values, because you can teach all that other stuff, but you can't teach values to align with your values. And that's something that really stuck out to me. It's something that I have since learned to really bring to the forefront of, you know, I'm somebody beyond the things that I know I can do. I am a very meticulous, I'm very passionate about employees and employee development and my own development. I am passionate about the work that we do, and you're never going to catch me slacking because that's how much I bring of myself to the job. Those are things that can't be taught. Those are things that, but those are things that are absolutely required in any job that you go to. And then I can learn the other stuff. And that's also something that I take when I am in the process of hiring people to work for me and on my teams is, you know, even if they haven't done X, Y, and Z things, is this somebody who has that chemistry and who has that energy to bring that my team and our company really needs and wants? And chemistry is it can be honestly very undervalued at times, but I think it's one of the most important things that you can really showcase during those times. So any questions here? Okay, it's just a few more slides. Okay, so bringing it all together. So last year, after a few years at my agency, I decided to take a new role at Gartner. And I was getting to a decent place at my agency. I didn't have any beef or anything. I was leaving actually under great terms, but I knew I wanted to do something different, and I wanted to do something that brought together all of the things I had done before. You know, I didn't want to feel like I had to start over. And I now felt, like I said before, you're going to keep iterating on your brand. At the time, I felt like, you know, I am somebody who knows digital inside and out. And I'm also somebody who knows CPG and client side inside and out. And what does that make me? Well, that makes me somebody who's pretty apt for a consulting job. And so that was my new brand, and that's how I brought it together. And that's exactly what I was recruited and hired for. So over time, with any experience that you have, and that can be even the ad club experience that you're going through now, which is not the most traditional internship experience, but it is an experience that is developing each and every one of you. This is now a stamp on your brand. And so I used the fingerprint icon here on purpose because each of those wiggles is going to be something different to your brand, right? So on mine, it is the brand marketing at General Mills. It's the trade and technology experience that I had at iNation. It's my passion and love for sports, which, you know, I get that I'm not using that much nowadays, but I still have it. It's a lot of diversity and inclusion work that I've done that is rarely on my resume, but I wear it on my sleeve and I am very vocal about it, as you'll find on my LinkedIn. And each of those things really brings me to what my brand is and what I bring to a new employer every time. And it will behoove you to showcase exactly that in each of the conversations that you're going to have. And those, again, going back to the last slide of what they'd be missing by not hiring you and how to present your values, your brand is a reflection on your values. You know, your brand isn't just the things that you've done, but it's the things that you bring. And so I will absolutely recommend that every story that you tell here on, when you're applying for jobs, when you're interviewing for jobs, it should be one that feels well-rounded to you. So you never feel like, oh, you're omitting something because you think it may not be relevant. There's a good chance that it will bring some relevance one day. So you want to be able to showcase that this is who I am and this is what I bring to the job. So that's the bulk of my formal content, but I do have one last thing that wasn't on my agenda, but this is actually really important. So I know the topic for today was getting the job, but I'm actually going to contradict that a little bit. Your career, your goals it's more like a marathon And each job is a mile marker. And crossing each of those miles is extremely important, but it's going to take a lot. And if you remember what I said at the very beginning, that, you know, I still don't necessarily feel like I'm at my dream job or my end game. I'm very honest about that. And the mile marker that I'm at right now, it's an important one. It's not the final one, and you've got to keep hustling. And what I would say is hustle for your career, not just for the job. As you guys all are aware, it is incredibly competitive getting the job, but also once you're in the job, it will continue to be competitive. You'll be competing even with your peers and your friends who are at your job. You'll still be competing because we're in very matrixed organizations that do feed off of this. And it will be important for you to continue to showcase your brand and your work, but ideally, you're doing that for your career goals, not just for the job to check the boxes of the job. And so that's something that I would absolutely want to hit home with you guys, is that when you do get the job, keep hustling, hustle on the job and off the job to build your career for yourself.
I love that, Nandini. I love this. This is going to be my definitely the word of my day, or the quote of the day: hustle for your career and not the job. Because so many times I've gotten jobs where I'm trying to figure out, you know what, I'm just going to give them my B work because they don't value me. Yeah. And the bottom line is you can't see things that way. Yep. People who you don't even know are looking at you. Yep. And now with the you know, the onset of the web and all of these platforms, people are looking to populate experts, right, in their fields. So people are looking at people who are making things happen and are continuously. So I love it. Thank you so much. If anyone else has any questions, as you all know, we will definitely be we're recording all of the sessions, and so Nandini's presentation will be in next week's recap. And we have your information that they can reach out to you, Nandini, because sometimes people like to reach out. You know, I'm pretty sure they're blowing up your LinkedIn right now.
Of course, I'm happy to. But yeah, if you have any questions here, or even offline, absolutely, I'm happy to be a resource. And potentially, create informal mentoring relationships with anybody who's looking for some support there. I know it's harder nowadays, but
we would love to have you back for the last week, where we really will be focusing on like mock interviewing and presenting ourselves and things like that. So we can talk about that offline.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you. So everyone, we are now going to have Shameka Brown. Oh my goodness, Shameka.
Thank you, Erica.
Who most of you all have met. So I'm going to let her take it from here.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Nandini, for your excellent presentation. It's so wonderful to hear some of these core things that I may have forgotten, as I have been in this space for quite some time. So it's always good to hear. I am going to share my screen. And what we're going to do is quickly take you through some MBI exercises. Almost everyone has had the opportunity to finish a review with me. So now we're going to put it into action a little bit and take that into a new space. So as we have begun our sessions, I would love a moment to just breathe with me. So if you can, indulge me in taking 3 breaths. So again, we'll do it inhaling deeply through the nose and exhaling audibly through the mouth. And I'm going to close my eyes. Feel free to do the same. And just 3 in a row. So whenever you're comfortable, take the deep breath in, hold, and exhale. And inhale, hold, and exhale. Last one, inhale, Hold and exhale. Thank you all. Breath is life, and it's so important sometimes to just take a moment and remember that. So without further ado, just some grounding us back into the MBI and what it is. It's neuroscience-based assessment. It's around whole brain thinking. And the goal is to increase self-awareness and create meaningful connections. Just top line today, you will need to know your dominant quadrant. So if you don't remember, I know some of you, we talked about this 4 weeks ago. So if you don't remember, quickly pull up your MBI so that you're clear on what your dominant quadrant is, because we'll need that over the next 20 minutes or so. So just some top line review here. The L1s are the planners. Their first thought is what's the objective. They value performance, rationality, data, and facts. Decisions are based on that data, goals, and other objectives. They're known for liking to be right. And their communication style is clear, sensible, accurate, coherent, calculating, and probing. The R1s, that's the ideator. So that first thought is why not try? So they value experimentation and challenging the norm. Decisions are based on future possibilities and instinct. And R1s are known for being unconventional. Their communication style, challenging, visionary, imaginative, metaphorical, focuses on synthesizing ideas. Next up, we have the relator, which is the R2s. Their first thought, who's involved? Values relationships, loyalty, and cohesion. Decisions based on the best interests of the group. They're known for understanding others' perspectives, and their communication style, encouraging, empathetic, meaningful, frequent, emotionally expressive. And then we have the L2s, which are the implementers. The first thought, how will it get done? They value consistency, efficiency, thoroughness. Decisions are based on information and facts, known for being on time and focused on the process. Their communication style, correct, prepared, detailed, and systematic. All of that to say, we're gonna play a quick game before we get into some exercises that allow you to think about how you might respond based on your quadrants. So that's why it's important that you know which was your most dominant. So as a game here, you can come off mute if you want to shout out the answer, or you can type it in the chat. Erica and Maya, feel free to play along. So our first, who said it, all you have to say is whether it's L1, R1, R2, R1, etc. Okay? So who said it? Whoops. A budget is just a starting point. Who said that?
L1.
Would that be
L1.
L1? You think L1? Anyone else? Here, I'm thinking R1, who's all about ideating, sky's the limit. A budget? What's a budget? Nobody needs a budget. You need ideas. Okay, next one. Have you no heart?
Oh, that's
I'm seeing in the chat. I'm seeing in the chat. R2s, yes, R2s that are all about people and the feeling. Have you no heart? Yes, all the way R2. Next up, life without a plan is just luck.
Oh, that would be L1. L1.
L1. So it could go both ways. It could go both ways. I'm thinking L2 here, because L2s are all about process. So L1 is called the planner, but L2 is all about process, having a layout of life at like birth. That's L2. I see a lot of that in the chat. Okay, next one. So I was thinking.
R2.
I was thinking.
Wait, R1. R1.
See a lot of R1s, a couple of R2s. R1s are always thinking about the next idea. Always, always, always. Okay, let's do it. It's right there in black and white.
L1.
L1.
I'm seeing some L1s. L1s. I'm an L1.
L1.
All about the facts. Just the facts, ma'am. Just the facts. Yes. L1. And maybe a little L2, but L1 for sure. All right. To be early is to be on time.
L1.
L2.
L2. I'm hearing L1, L2. Seeing L2s. L2s seem to be a bit more time bound and time conscious. So you better believe if it's something around punctuality, an L2 is all about that life. Okay. It's not just about the numbers. This is a tricky one.
I think it's an R1.
R1, R2.
I agree with Zach.
R2.
Is it R2?
Which one, R1 or R2? See, it's between R1 and R2. Where are we going? Where are we going? I think it's an R2 because it's about people. It can be about connection. It can be about greater context. And R1 can get there too because of the expansiveness of the idea. So there's more to it than just, facts and numbers. But I was going R2 here because it's always more than what's on the page for an R2. Last one. I only care about the facts.
L1.
That's easy.
Julius
That's
is
L1.
over here. He's laughing. L1, facts are very important. They help you make decisions. Okay, people? I'm just saying. All right. Typically L1 because it's very pros, cons, not a lot of gray. Our L1s fall right here. So that was just a quick test to see personality-wise, can you spot it? And thinking about, looking at people on your team, people that you're working with, being able to identify what quadrant they may fall in can help you with, your ability to communicate and strategizing a plan on how to sell through your ideas if needed. So that was just a quick refresher on that. Next up, another quick game that I'd love to do with you, and this was just the 2 exercises that we're doing today, is around blind spotting. So a lot of times when we're working in our quadrant, especially when we're stressed out or, short on time, we revert and default even further into the quadrant that becomes the most dominant. But in that, sometimes we forget about other things that may need to be taken into consideration in making that decision. So what we're going to do, each quadrant is going to be given a scenario to think about. You can write your answer down in the chat, or 1 or 2 people might be able to share their thoughts and their approach live, coming off mute. And then what I want is, as they are thinking about that, there's another quadrant, the opposing quadrant, that's been assigned as the blind spotter. So as you're listening to what their solution is, I want the blind spotters to write in the chat some things that they may be missing or not considering because you're on the opposite end of how they would think, all right? So first up, we're gonna start with our L2s, because I always end with L2s. So we're starting with L2s. So all my L2s, get ready. Your scenario is, your team landed a dream assignment with your favorite artist. It's completely open-ended, no budget, no timeline, no creative mandatories. You can do whatever you want. What does your pitch deck include? Okay, so my L2s, think about that. I'll give you a minute. My R1s, you start thinking about how you might approach it. And again, these are opposing quadrants, so they'll probably be very different approaches. So any of my L2s would like to share, you can type in the chat, or you can come off mute. What would your deck include? Any takers? I know we have some L2s in here.
I can go.
Okay, sure.
So first we need to figure out who's gonna do what.
Okay.
Based on the pitch deck to spread the roles between the team. We still need some timeline, even if it's no timeline, to make people organized to work together. You need to have some deadlines and creative mandatories. Allow your team then to be as creative as they want. And what does your pitch deck include? So my pitch deck with my dream assignment, favorite artist, something crazy but at the same time reasonable, which we'll need to think about what this artist does, who is his audience, who is his target, how we can implement this into our campaign, what feelings people have when they see his work, and then based on that, just like work on our deck, I think.
Okay.
I would just do
That's cool.
some cool work regarding some like diversity, something like, you know, something super bold. And as we have this dream artist, right? Why not?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
just
No start here.
And just like do some social
Like
campaign.
social media.
No, social like a campaign.
Okay.
Using this artist. I'm sorry, it was like right on spot.
Great. So
There should
I'm
be
seeing
guidelines.
thank you. Thank you, Olga. I'm seeing, so Victoria says, yes, it's hard, some structure, but also some crazy solutions. And then Richard says, yeah, it's hard because technically we prefer a guideline. So that's exactly the exercise, right? Because there are no limits. And the first thing Olga did was put some limits on that. She was like, you know what? Timelines are your friend. You need some of that in your life. And that's inherent, you know, to an L2. R1s, any thoughts? I see R1, yeah, what's off limits, can't be touched. What is the goal, ask, including videos for interaction, make the client feel part of the presentation. And R1, what would you add to the approach, if anything, to where the L1s would start? R1s, first, we think about this crazy idea we want to accomplish at the end of the project and work backwards to make sure it can happen. Yes, that's very R1.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Many ideas, no boundaries, starting points, even if they are very unrealistic. Yes. So now you're starting to see where people are, right? So the L2s are very much about, you know, having a destination and knowing we're going to point D on this trip and we're going to get through A, B, C, and D. And so while there is great appreciation for the crazy ideas, the big ideas, L1s will gravitate to structure, which is great because every team needs some of that. To stretch out of that, pull yourself a little bit more into that crazy thinking. Pull yourself a little bit more into the what if space that R1s always live in. Now, you may not go all the way into that R1 space, but if you're an L2, try to think about what's that one step just beyond your default so that you can continue to stretch and grow and still deliver on the things that are required of you as an L2, but going and stretching yourself a little bit more, which everyone was starting to do because, I mean, it's an opportunity of a lifetime. Like, you got to do something big, you got to do something crazy. So that's great. Let's move to the next one. R2s. So my R2s, my people. The scenario here, your team just won a new business pitch and you're in charge of arranging congratulatory gifts. You just learned the 5 interns who also pulled the all-nighter aren't on the list due to limited budget. What do you do? My L1s, get on deck. You want to pitch, Olga, so I would put in my own money because everyone should be appreciated. Any thoughts from my R2s? You can come off mute or type it in the chat. What would you do?
I'm a relator. I was thinking that it's very we, not me mentality. So I would definitely go out of my way to make sure that everybody who was involved gets that like validation of like hard work and effort. And without them, we wouldn't have made it happen.
Right. Okay. No, this is all true. I see Maya stretch the budget to include them, and maybe use some of your own money. I would make a scene about why there's no budget. Lessen the budget. Okay, L1s. Any thoughts from anyone who's an L1?
I can give it a crack. I think for me, like Brother Aaron said, it's kind of it's a we not me scenario. I mean, if everybody kind of played a role into the overall development of whatever that business pitch was, then everybody should in some way get some type of equity in some shape or form. Now, of course, we're acknowledging the fact that the budget is limited. So I guess it's a matter of trying to provide equity to the team in a way that is like doesn't rely on just the money. So perhaps it's the network, perhaps it's references, in any way I can, just trying to throw that alley to the team because it'd be kind of, I was about to cuss. It'll be kind of bad. It'd be bad on my part. It wouldn't be a good look. I'm at one. So, but yeah, I think that's just
okay. All right. Well, so for your R2s who are all about people, I'm not surprised that it should be fair. Everyone should be acknowledged. Everyone should be represented as being part of the team, and being able to have their contributions celebrated. So that is definitely where R2s stand. In terms of giving your own money up and putting it in, that's very R2 because it is about the team. It is about everyone feeling valued. Those who are very high L1 could say, well, I mean, it's the budget. It is what it is. And so that's where it falls and you end up with that friction between L1s and R2s. A lower score L1 can land where many of you did in terms of, well, what's the budget? If the goal is to celebrate the team, then we need to rethink the celebration. And so with that, lowering the individual budget for the item so that everybody can get a gift, that might be where everyone stands. So for those R2s, maybe step just outside, an inch or two outside of the selflessness, because there could be another way to get everyone recognized without you having to sacrifice yourself to do it. So that's just kind of a watch out for R2s. When it's all about everyone else, R2s can end up on the shorter end by their own hands. So think about that and consider that. Your heart is always in the right place, but there may be another way to do it without the great amount of self-sacrifice. Okay, next up. R1s, my R1s, you have been given the opportunity to present your passion project at an agency-wide event. You just finished the project after months of work. Where do you begin in organizing the virtual presentation? So my L2s, get on deck. Any R1s want to come on or put it in the chat? You can make this big project presentation. Where do you start in organizing it?
I'm an R1,
I know R1s
so I'll
are
go.
Not quiet. I'm like, R1s are never quiet. Okay.
I was trying to let everyone else, I was going to let everyone else talk. So maybe I'll just jump it off. Maybe I'll just give a jump off. So for me, because we worked in a team, right? And we've done this, this passion project, I would make sure to rally the team, get everyone really motivated, and then start, you know, really ideating the best way to actually organize it. And then from there, through the ideas coming from that particular hyped, you know, ideation, then kind of decide. That's where I would begin. I'd begin with some type of, you know, group session where we're ideating the best way. So that's the beginning for me.
Okay. All right. Anyone else? So you would bring the group together. R1, start with the problem, bring in people, bring people to my perspective, reveal the idea. Okay. Anyone else? Oh, I see L2 blind spot, consult with the team, set up a general guide. Yep.
Adding on to what
Anyone
Eric
else?
said, I R1, I think besides, you know, getting the team together, the presentation has to be focused on what we accomplished, because we are very few. So we're gonna show them what we did, how we did it, and then we kind of work backwards, like, oh yeah, we did so much work for this, we had to struggle, but you know, we're gonna put the big picture first, because that's what we did.
All right.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So my R1 isn't dominant, it's R2, but in my head, if I worked on this passion project, I would talk a lot about the idea and then the possibilities of what this idea would bring to the agency and what the implications would be based on this idea. That would be my starting point. So idea and then its implications.
Okay, great. Yeah, so R1's always about the big picture, all this amazing work that you did. Structure can be a problem sometimes. And so it's interesting, Erica, your idea was get everybody together to figure it out. Because a lot of R1s, it's like, this is not what I would choose to do, but let me know how it goes and I'll do my part. So in stretching your R1-ness, you know, as you sit at 30,000 feet and you need to start to begin to bring the idea down to the ground, one of the L2s was like, get a guide. So perhaps one of those things is that outline, right? To figure out, okay, if we start with the big idea, how does that ladder back down through the process? Or do we start with the process and end with the big idea? So again, thinking about how it truly represents the grand nature of the work you did, but has a flow that everyone can appreciate and understand all the work you did. And so that guide of the L2, well, you may not break it down into an outline. You might be able to just take one step outside of your R1 to begin to drill down a little deeper into how to strategize to sell it. Because that's just as important sometimes as the idea itself. Okay. So our last one, my L1s. As you near the end of an important project, one of your team members hasn't been pulling his, her, their weight, but is preparing to take full credit during the presentation. How do you handle the situation? That's for my L1s. My R2s, get on deck. Zach. Any L1s willing to step in here, either in the chat or off mute?
I can try to give this one a crack in. As an
okay, go ahead.
This one, especially throughout, all throughout high school and college. Oh my God, I saw this all the time. But
yes,
of course, there's little petty things like putting your name last on the presentation or a deck or whatever. But I oftentimes I didn't really feel a necessity to, I guess out them or any way like that. It was more of just like a situation of clear. It's going to become pretty apparent who actually worked on this based upon the way in which they presented. You can always kind of tell the group members who didn't really participate in the in the main research or ideation or things like that. And I mean, taking full credit, that's a different scenario. I think it's just I don't know. This is never mind. Because I think I'm gonna just get petty. I don't want to I don't know. I don't like that.
Yeah, no, it's a problem. It's a problem. Yeah, you're not alone. Anybody else? I'm seeing in the chat. Respectfully have a conversation. Be straightforward. that it's not professional, tell them the wrong meeting time. Okay. Anybody else? Strong R2.
I think that what I would do is I would throw them something to do. So like last minute, even if that person is already, like somebody else has that task, let's just give it to them so that they can do it, so that they can actually do something. If they don't do it, then hello. But
yeah. Okay. I see Aaron be blunt and ask, do they believe they deserve the credit? So my L1s, we are very straightforward and at sometimes very, very blunt. And so that could go a number of ways, honestly, in terms of whether they actually get up to present, whether they're welcomed into the presentation. I mean, it could go left for no one very quickly. So I feel my R2s that are saying, you know, talk to them, be clear, you know, because at the end of the day, you still need to present as a group. But an L1 may not really have full sight of that in that moment, because the facts are the facts. You didn't do it, so why are you getting up here now to be a part of it? So as an L1, step outside, think outside the moment, go beyond the facts, think a little longer term in terms of what your reaction and your response may do for the group and how it may end up affecting the presentation. So there's really no right or wrong ways to think about it. The point of the exercise here was to just give you a moment to pause and think about what your default response would be. And one, is that professional? Is that appropriate in the scenario? And two, might there be some things that you may not have considered? So that's what I just wanted you to think about here. So as I close, this is some of the value add that comes from having an MBI and knowing. So as you move through your career, your schoolwork, and you need to make some of these important decisions in life, think about your MBI and consider at the very least what that opposing quadrant might do in terms of helping you identify potential blind spots, because that's a quick gut check of like, okay, I know I'm not all the way on the other end of the spectrum, but is there something that I could be missing? And then lastly, use this as a tool to help mitigate your own bias by acknowledging how your brain works, okay? It's not rocket science, it's neuroscience. And you all have the secret sauce. So you can knowingly walk into situations and respond to them at a much higher level, okay? So with that, thank you all. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. You all have my email address. It's been a pleasure working with all of you through the MBI. I hope you really leverage it as a tool. And with that, I will turn it over to Julius. You're welcome, everyone. I'll turn it over to Julius for the next part of this presentation, which is going to be absolutely amazing. No pressure. All right. Everybody hanging in there?
Hello, everyone. I know we did a little magic trick there. To Shameka's point, I hope everyone continues to use their MBI to their advantage. As she said, it's not rocket science, it's neuroscience. And everything in life literally starts with the fact that we are all human beings. And how we process and share information is literally the crux of how we move through the world, regardless of what that information may be. And so with all of you aspiring to work in advertising, media, or some form of a communications industry, that's extremely important. And so in the spirit of kind of building on top of that, what we want to do today is show that we are actually more alike than we are different, where exclusion can be something that we can leverage as a means to be able to build community and connectivity. And so to that end, I will be sharing my screen in a second and taking you all through what we call Know-isms. So 1 second. Yes. All right. Can everyone see that? All right. So just to recap for you all that may have forgotten who I am, I am Julius, founder, CEO of the Adversity Group, of which the only one there is a subsidiary of. We essentially have been assembled to help dismantle systemic discrimination. And we'll go through identifying what the system of that actually is today. But before I begin, I just want to say that, you know, I am a human being, and I myself am also biased. So even as a diversity and inclusion practitioner, I also suffer from having to check my own privilege and my own bias, because I am a human being. So I just start all my presentations with that piece, because oftentimes people come to conversations like this ready to defend and ready to be defensive, wherein everyone essentially is trying to figure out a means to be able to get past the same human trait. So to that end, we've put together this program to essentially talk about intersectionality as a means to be able to minimize the barrier of entry to have conversations like this, because one of the things that are needed in order to check privilege is acknowledgement, right? So one of the things that Shameka just took you through was acknowledging how you think, how you process information and share information. But beyond that, this is about identifying what areas of difference, be it gender, sexuality, race, so on and so forth, that someone else may experience, and then being able to have conversations or approach empathy in a way that allows you to be more confident in being allies, advocates, and support for those who are experiencing inequality. So to that end, Know-isms uses media, be it news, TV, music, movies, everything that is current event, to be able to provide context. So you all now then are able to spot moments where different isms come up, or it allows for us to have a group conversation about isms that may have been identified as such, but then we can expand and expound on what those may be, as a means for everyone to have a greater understanding of what isms are, and how they manifest in the world. So I'm going to show a series of clips, because it is media led, all of which are current clips. And then I'll walk through kind of like what the structure of each of these clips are. I also want to say too, we are all adults here, or at least I think we are. So the clips are found media. They're all things that exist. There may be some racial slurs, there may be some derogatory language. Please know that it's not me doing it to be salacious or kind of like, you know, for clout. I'm really doing it as a means to be able to have an educated and well-rounded conversation with everyone here. So if anyone is offended, please, I apologize, let me know, feel free. You can let Erica know, and or, you know, just disengage from the conversation if you choose. To that end, we'll start with this clip.
You said you don't believe systemic racism?
I do not.
At all in the U.S.?
I do not.
Okay, is any systemic racism against African Americans in the United States?
I will say it again. I do not.
Do you think systemic racism is a problem in law enforcement agencies in the United States?
No, I don't think there's systemic racism. I think 99.9% of our law enforcement officers are great Americans.
I think there's racism in the United States still, but I don't think that the law enforcement system is systemically racist.
Rudy Giuliani recently made the assertion that Black Lives Matter movement, a movement that is grounded in notions of respect, dignity, justice, and sanctity of life, sanctity of Black life, you noted that this was inherently racist. I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
Gary McCarthy, what do you think Black Lives Matter? Do you agree with the former mayor of New York City, Rudy Giuliani?
Well, I could tell you this. I think if there was a movement called White Lives Matter, it would be considered racist.
So, in the chat or call out, how many of you believe this to be true? And essentially what I mean by that is Black Lives Matter being a racist movement.
Are you asking if we believe that Black Lives Matter is a racist movement and there versus is there systemic
discriminate, right, that too.
Okay. Well, I do believe that there is systemic racism, and I do not believe that Black Lives Matter is a racist organization. And I love the whole thing where it says, you know, if one house on a street is on fire and you call the, you know, the firemen and they come and yet they water everybody else's house and they don't get to the house that's on fire, does that make sense? And so I think that kind of illustrates what I believe Black Lives Matter is and represents. It's helping that one house that needs the fire to be removed.
Okay. Yeah, I see in the chat, you know, it's not, BLM is not a racist movement. There's systemic racism. BLM is not a racist movement. Exactly, Erica. Okay. My job in this is not to give you definitive answers. It's really more to kind of open up the dialogue for you to land on your own conclusions and then be able to have safe space conversation so that we can be influenced and learn the perspectives of others. That is truly diversity of thought. So a couple things, some housekeeping. Every time you see this plus sign on your screen, it's an opportunity for you to add to the conversation. Because essentially this is everyone having dialogue. It's not a talking head. I am not here to talk at you. We're here to talk together. And so whatever the topic of which we'll be adding context to will be in the center of the plus sign. Some of it will be poll, some of it will be call out, all of it can be in the chat. And so essentially, you know, it's not, again, not meant for shock value. It's meant to just provide context. And so we will be moving through these clips as a means to be able to provide structure for today's conversation. So today we will be focused on defining the system of racism, each of the different levels of it, which there are 4. We'll also move into identifying examples of racism, and how those things manifest in the world and even within ourselves. And then we'll move into a discussion about systemic racism versus racism, of which you all have already kind of responded and let me know your thoughts as it relates to if systemic racism is actually a thing or not. So what we will start off with is something that has been in the news recently, which is Juneteenth. So Juneteenth, for those who do not know, Juneteenth was the day in which slaves were made aware in Galveston, Texas, of their emancipation in 1865. Now, to that end, essentially during that time, there were about 4 million slaves at the time that were now told that they were free. In a nation where they had no structure, there was no even sense of family because a lot of people were displaced for centuries. And so to that end, it was really just kind of like, where do we go from here? Now, the reason why I want to use this as a jump off point to be able to talk about one of the first areas of discrimination, which is institutional discrimination or racism, is because essentially what this represented was the start of the system. And so a variety of different things started to come thereafter, right? So it's important to note that 1865 is the oldest celebration known within the US as the celebration of when slaves were emancipated. However, it came 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. So therein lies kind of, what the discrepancies would be and still kind of are as it relates to particular groups of people, namely in this case, people of color or African Americans. And so a lot of individuals ended up trying to move north as a means to get out of the South or the oppressive South. But they would soon realize that moving north did not necessarily guarantee opportunity, freedom, so on and so forth. And so that came by way of institutional racism. And that was essentially the integration of things like Jim Crow laws, mass incarceration, police brutality. And most of these things are the topics of which Black Lives Matter, as you guys are currently experiencing it on the news, are protesting against, right? So it's a lot of the monumental statues as it relates to Confederacy, so on and so forth, that people are now starting to raise awareness about and push back against. So one of the things I want to talk about as it relates to just kind of setting the tone for how systemic racism plays out, right, is mass incarceration. So these numbers essentially kind of illuminate that America, and this is America by way of Pew Research Center, has 2.1 million people who are currently incarcerated. Now, of those facts and stats, 30% of those individuals that are incarcerated are Caucasian or identify as white Americans. 23% of them are Hispanic or identify as Hispanic Americans. And then 33% of them are Black or identify as African American or Black Americans. Now, when you compare the population that is incarcerated to the population within America, you start to really kind of see the disproportionate, if you will, outcomes that skew more toward incarcerating a particular race as opposed to another. Now, I don't necessarily think that this race is predisposed to be more violent or criminal than others. But when you look at the population, 63% of the population is white versus 30% of the population that's incarcerated, is white. That really kind of is a stark difference between 12% of our population in America is African American or identify as Black versus 33% which are incarcerated, right? So that's more than double the actual population that's incarcerated. And so that starts to point to the effects, if you will, of systemic discrimination or racism. So one of the questions that comes up is, what is the difference between equality and equity? Does anyone have any thoughts on this? You can add to the chat or you can shout out.
Equality is more saying that everyone has the exact same thing, I guess. And then equity is making sure that while you might not have the exact same thing, I don't know, you have the same amount of it, or you have the, I don't know, like the equal amount to succeed, or I don't know. That probably wasn't the best way to explain it. I know there's a really good picture though, where it's like kids standing on a box, and equality is like, the box is all the same size. So they're all, but each kid is, there's like 3 kids and they're all different heights. So even though they're all in the same sized box, they can't all see over the fence because while the box is all the same size for them, it doesn't apply to each kid, versus equity where, the shorter kid has a taller box so they can all see over the fence.
Right, that's actually, and I've seen that image before, and maybe some others have. And that's a really good image to explain kind of equity versus equality, and you're absolutely right. So equality basically provides the equal opportunity and same opportunity for everyone. However, equity takes into effect kind of the disparity or gap therein between one group and another, right? So one of the things that I was told, and that always sticks out in my head is, I heard a quote that said, equality is the mask or the disillusion of privilege, because equality, the only way for equality to work is if everyone starts from the same place. And the reality of it is, and how Juneteenth is celebrated and the reason why it is celebrated, and then how I just illuminated the differences in percentages in terms of mass incarceration versus the population of people who live in the United States, you can clearly see that there is a disproportionate outcome as it relates to a particular group of individuals. In this case, we categorize it by race. And so to be able to provide equal opportunity for everyone, there needs to be some understanding of what those discrepancies or those disparities are, right? And so equality oftentimes ends up being a situation where people can, not with any meaning or malintent, kind of create a situation where they're perpetuating inequality, because naturally no one starts from the same place. And so today's conversation is identifying the various different systems and social constructs that exist, but then also making us all aware in terms of what those disparity gaps are, so that we can be more equitable in our approach, as opposed to using equality, which could potentially be perpetuating the problem. So one of the questions that comes up, and Maya, please introduce the poll, is can Black people be racist? So this came out of the fact that I, as myself, as a African-American, have heard a variety of different people ask this question, some within my own community, some within my own family, others who are allies of mine have asked this question. This is one that surely has come top of mind for many people who are asking the question about, is Black Lives Matter a racist movement? And so this is a question that I wanted to pose today.
Wait, but it's not only about Black Lives Matter, it's also about different people, right? And they have different personalities. So is it, or we're just focusing more on the Black Lives Matter movement?
In this conversation, Olga?
Yeah, like overall, in this poll.
Oh, no. So the question was primarily, can Black people be racist? And the reason why I asked that question is because I've had people ask me, and or say definitively that they can or they cannot. And so I just wanted to get you all's opinions on it. And so the poll, we'll share the results at the end of the conversation when we move through kind of each of the different system points of discrimination.
Okay.
So the next clip that I'll show is one that I know everyone has probably seen. And so we can discuss it afterwards. I don't want to give it away, but just essentially just walk through it.
Hey, Julius.
Develop your thoughts and we'll move through it. Yep.
Just let me know when you want me to end the poll. There's still about 10 people who have not taken it. A few of those include us.
Okay, you can end it after 30 seconds.
But hold the results.
But hold the results.
Please stop. Sir, I'm asking you to stop.
Please don't come close to me.
Sir, I'm asking you to stop recording me.
Please don't come close to me.
Please take your phone off.
Please don't come close to
And
me.
I'm taking a picture and calling the cops.
Please call the cops. Please call the cops.
I'm going to tell them there's an African-American man threatening my life.
Please tell them whatever you like.
Excuse me? I'm sorry, I'm in the Ramble, and there is a man, African-American, who's a vice president. He's recording me and threatening me and my dog. There is an African-American man, I'm in Central Park. He is recording me and threatening myself and my dog. And I'm sorry, I can't hear you either. I'm being threatened by a man in the Ramble. Please send the cops immediately. I'm in Central Park in the Ramble. I don't know.
So does anybody have any thoughts as it relates to this clip? Share in the chat or just call out.
I think she's a terrible person. She's actually like, for someone to use that as a threat, it's sort of like, whether she understands it or not, but you kind of understand that if I'm going to call the cops and tell them an African-American man is threatening me, they're going to come after everything that's been seen throughout like years. Like, and this is like in the midst of Black Lives Matter and the George Floyd stuff. And for her to use that as a threat is fully knowing that she could put this man's life at risk, which is crazy.
Yeah, so I'm looking in the chat and essentially I think everyone kind of agrees. Makes me upset. This is gross. Yikes. Agree every time. Always playing victim. Weaponizing her whiteness. Again, this is not me directing the conversation. This is everyone having a open space, safe space conversation here. But essentially what I want to say is this is an example of what we call privilege. And so the definition of privilege essentially is the special right or advantage or immunity granted or available only to a particular person or group. And so in the context of how we started this dialogue and started this overall conversation was, is there such thing as systemic racism? To some, they do believe that it exists. And it's very obvious in this case that she knew the levers of which to pull to be able to gain access to that. And so weaponizing, I think somebody wrote in the chat, weaponizing her whiteness. It's very interesting that someone understands inherently that they are in a position to weaponize their race, which is quite interesting in and of itself, especially when you compare that to the question that I just posed, which is, can Black people be racist? And you can add that to any other race they're in. So to that end, that essentially talks about the second level of racism or discrimination, which is interpersonal. This one is probably the most easily to identify because essentially it is how we interact with each other. And so this case, that was a kind of snapshot of how she was interacting with him and he was kind of interacting with her. And you can see how that played out. But oftentimes in this construct, this is where privilege shows up. And if people are weaponizing their privilege, this is how it potentially manifests itself. And so this is essentially the act, if you will, of racism. And depending on who is actually weaponizing it or who is pointing that as a weapon will depend on how great of an impact that may play out. And so I'm gonna go through now a series of videos, all of which found media, all of which in the news. And I will ask a series of questions, 3 exactly. Maya will introduce a poll. Please answer within 30 seconds, 45 seconds of that, but then you can also have more dialogue in the chat. And just be as honest as you potentially can. There's no right or wrong answers in this. We're just having open dialogue. Here we are. So, question, and Maya, please introduce the poll.
People were asking what was happening. It was lagging.
So in the clip, I see a lot of people were saying that it was lagging. It was a clip of teenage, primarily Caucasian teenage kids that had gathered on the steps of a monument, I believe in DC. And they were kind of like face to face with some indigenous Americans, of which were playing they were playing drums and wearing traditional garb, and they were chanting. And so for those who got a chance to see it, I'm curious to know who would be considered the victim or the villain in this case. Maya, you have the poll? Yep.
How do we answer this? It's asking who's the victim and who's the villain. So like, how do we? Yeah.
Yeah, the way it's set up, unfortunately, we're not able to answer it because we need two different answers.
Yeah.
Okay, no worries. I'm just curious to know if anyone, we won't even do the poll. Just to hear you all, anyone want to call out to say kind of who they feel the victim or villain was in this case?
The indigenous are the victims. I mean, they've been the victims for years. I mean, let's just be real. From a historical standpoint, they were, the land that we're on now is the indigenous people's land, you know? And
But I think we're talking about in the context of this particular clip.
Oh, definitely, it's definitely the indigenous are the victim, and the villains are those little snot-nosed kids.
Okay, anyone else have a different perspective?
I mean, I'm going to jump in, but that's because I saw the full version of the video. I don't know if that counts, but I think
that'll come later.
That will come later? Okay, so should I stop talking? Okay.
I guess, you know, what I think we all have, so I have to pull myself back as well. So the thing is, just from that perspective, I think this is really about perspective, if I'm not wrong, Julius, right? The perspective of the angle, or the point of view of the angle.
Yes, of the clip that you are seeing.
Okay.
I think that the kids are victims as well because they lack that education and the culture and the upbringing, and because of that, the actions are so, I mean, I don't know.
I hear you, Olga. I hear you, because I kind of feel the same way. I think I've said this before. I think they're both victims because they're victims of miseducation, no education. I definitely think that the indigenous person in this particular clip, the way I see it, if I hadn't known everything, to me would be the victim. But I hear what you're saying.
Yeah. I just feel like education is the answer for everything. As you said at the beginning of the session, that we kind of need to educate ourselves to understand this question better.
Yeah,
what's going on.
So in the chat, I see people said victim is the kids. I think because I'm not sure why they joined in. I'm sure there's a greater context of the video. Objectively speaking, it's a bad look, bystander effect, but that still isn't an excuse too. So moving into the next clip, same day, same event.
Pray the Most High bless you into the Prince of Paris. A bunch of hyenas. But see, there's a reason why. There's a reason why y'all outnumber us and y'all keep y'all distance. Holy guys, no more than one person in the Hebrew life. Look at this here.
And when you see us, it's 5 of us. Look at this. There's 5 of us and they got us surrounded, King.
Anybody want to share their thoughts on this perspective? Victim or villain? Where are the parents in the chat? This is why I never joined a frat. They are too wild.
I mean, you should think also about there are so many people with the psychological problems, and this is the question. That's why we have a lot of problems in this country as well, because parents do not pay so much attention to what kids are experiencing and so on, and they've been in a lot of like drugs, Adderall, all this stuff. So there's so many components to all this, that it's so hard to answer this question. I don't know.
I think my opinion on this particular clip is they're all villains. And I saw someone put in there the hoteps, because I feel like they're villains. And when I use the word villain, and I have to remind myself over and over, just in the context of this particular exercise, because that's such a harsh, it's really hard. This is an activity I've done once before. It's really harsh because to villainize people is not my first thing to do, right? Because we, as you can hear all the explanations, I just feel like we can come up with so many excuses for all the behaviors. So I'm gonna step away now. Stepping away, going on mute, muting myself.
So the reason why I use these words in particular, to your point though, Erica, they are harsh and they are extreme, but oftentimes these are the words that people use. And so there oftentimes is a good person and a bad person, a good guy and a bad guy, a good girl or woman and a bad woman or a bad girl. So essentially it's victim or villain, dark or light. I hate to say it, but that's oftentimes how people see it. And so in the exercise that we're looking at perspective, it's really an opportunity to hear what people think based on a snapshot in life, right? And so oftentimes you see things, especially with camera phones, the news, so on and so forth, you may take things and see something and out of context think one thing, but until you have the full scope and understanding of it, sometimes it can lead you down a path that could be misleading. So there's one more clip.
This land was taken away from you because you worship everything except the Most High. You're not an Indian. Indian means savage. You know where that name came from? You know where that name came from? It came from the so-called white man.
Indian does not mean savage.
Indian means savage, brother.
I don't know where you got that from.
Look it up, brother.
I did look it up. I'm a historian.
In the English dictionary in your Webster's, it means savage, man.
That's right.
Pompous bastards over there wearing "Make America Great."
That's right.
Again.
Little Billy.
This is the one.
Little corny ass Billy in there.
Why you not angry at
Little
them?
corny ass Billy Bob.
People.
See how you got these pompous bastards come down here in the middle of a native rally with their dirty ass hat on, with their dusty ass hat on, little dusty ass animals.
America ain't never been great. It only been great for you damn pack of woods. When you have free labor.
And that's why you got little Billy and them over there with they Make America Great hats again.
You got the little Kanye's next to them. Look at little Kanye.
Right.
Little Kanye niggas. Simple Kanye's. So that's what we out here trying to do. We not out here trying to cause trouble.
So, same question, same event. Anybody want to chime in? Villain or victim? Who was the racism directed at? And who was the recipient? Anybody? Don't all jump in at once.
I think that's kind of hard just because when you say who's the racism directed at, I feel like that goes back to the other question, can black people be racist? You know? I don't think it's hard to take the sides of the people preaching because they're kind of like attacking everybody else. But I think it's about how you go about what you're talking about, for them at least, you know? Because definitely it's hard to feel sympathetic or even like want to fight for their cause when they're calling people Kunyes, you know?
Good point. Good point. And so that's a great segue into third level of discrimination, which is internalized discrimination, or in this case, internalized racism, which essentially is when you've been subject to so many different angles and areas and constructs that discrimination is played in, that you start to then point it at yourself. People within your community, people within who you identify as, so on and so forth. So Osman, you made actually a really good point in that these men who, from my vantage point, look like black people or of African descent. And everyone, I believe, in this conversation knows that Kanye is also a black man or also of African descent. So to refer to others who are within the same identifiable community or race as something derogatory would be an example of internalized racism. Not only have they pointed it at themselves, but they also pointed at others who identify in a similar manner or race. And so often those who are within this internalized racism mindset have that of someone who is victimized, right? So they've been long-standing kind of exposed to various different forms of discrimination, as I said before, to the point where it starts to compromise their belief system. Long-term exposure to internalized racism also can have health implications, which are oftentimes even worse than violence, right? So from a psychological place, if you're constantly under stress, you know, it has metaphysical reaction to your body as well, cortisol levels, so on and so forth. Hence the reason why people who are of color oftentimes factually die at a rate 3 to 5 times greater than any other racial counterpart, right? So that's the systemic, that's the compounded example of what racism can manifest as in this internalized, if you will, level. Does anybody have any thoughts to share as it relates to just the feeling of being discriminated? And it could be racially or it could be in any other form. Has anyone felt any type of stress as it relates to feeling excluded or feeling discriminated? Feel free to jump in, anybody.
I felt discriminated from some particular groups just only because I've had accent and people were assuming that I'm not smart enough and cannot be included in the conversations because like English is not my first language or something like that.
Yeah, and so one of the things, and thank you for sharing, Olga. One of the things I want to say here is that, you know, even though we're talking about internalized racism, right, in the context of race, regardless of what the level of discrimination is or the ism that you experience, internalizing those feelings or the feeling of exclusion or discrimination essentially can manifest itself in the same way, right? You end up being stressed, feeling anxious, so on and so forth. And so the outcome ends up being the same. Now, depending on how much or how compounded that is, it will determine how great or how impactful that has on the individual person. Does anybody want to have, you know, anything else to add to it before we move on?
It's okay if I could jump in on this one too.
Yeah, feel free.
So for me, where I'm from in Brentwood, it's definitely a community mostly composed of Salvadorians. My family's Salvadorian, and when I went to St. John's in the one of the other campuses in Staten Island, I've met a lot of different people, got to know each other, and then even in class such as history or economics, when someone brings out recent events that occurred here in Brentwood back in 2016, when rest in peace, these 2 girls who were killed by MS-13 gangs. A few of the students brought out that I was like, hey, like Anthony happens to be from Brentwood, and then they were talking to me. And at first I was like, okay, maybe just because I'm from Brentwood, I might know a thing or two, but then they started assuming that I was affiliated with the gangs just because I happened to be from there. And to me, it's like, well, that's just because I'm from Brentwood. It doesn't mean I automatically am part of a gang, especially because I'm happen to be Salvadorian. And then things like that started to go around as stupid rumors, where it's like, oh, watch out for that dangerous kid. He's part of, he's from that town and stuff. So it's like, to me, it's like, I have no intentions to hurt anyone. I'm not into that gang lifestyle or anything like that. I don't know why people would say this about me because I come from that town. I admit, yeah, this town has had some bad history, but it's continuing to improve here, which I'm proud to be part of, but it definitely hurt me a lot because for some people, they just started looking away at me at one point.
Wow. So thank you for sharing, Anthony. Again, even though we're talking about these various different systems in the context of race, again, the feeling of discrimination is a feeling. And the manifestation of that will essentially yield the same result. And so what we really try and do as it relates to having intersectional conversation is to get people to understand and identify with the feeling, right? And so we can oftentimes, as I started this conversation, to say that I am human, I am a D&I practitioner, and I also am biased. I also, live in my own privilege at times. You constantly have to check in with that. And a way to do that, beyond just from a neuroscience place, right? Shameka made reference to it. It's not rocket science, it's neuroscience. A part of that neuroscience understanding is identifying with the feeling of exclusion. So use that as your point of being able to be more empathetic in how you move through the world. So you're a little bit more mindful and you can acknowledge the difference that exists, and also celebrate the things that make us more alike than we are different. So thank you for sharing that, Anthony. I really appreciate it. I see the chat is blowing up, but we got to keep moving on. So I'm going to share.
I know, I hate that because the chat room everyone is really, if you could just spend 1 second or two, I know you gotta move forward, but I
see it. So I feel discriminated all the time as an Asian American with a Black male partner. Wow. Yep. So I also want to say too, that I'm spending time talking about the difference between the act of racism versus the system of racism, as a means to really kind of ground us in understanding that difference and understanding that we can all be arbiters, if you will, of perpetuating those isms. This can be a jump off point to have a variety of different conversations. This one in particular, though, I felt was the most timely, given the fact of everything that's going on. But there will be an opportunity for us to have deeper and greater conversations. So please feel free to email us after. I just want to read a few more comments. Then why are you talking about a group of people you don't identify as? I think if it's not your history or culture, then how can you really talk about another ethnicity? I feel discriminated all the time. Heard that one. I feel discriminated most times. I introduce myself using my leg's name. So for the past 2 years, I've used my English name to avoid that. Just recently, I was using my legal name more and slowly allow myself to be who I am, regardless of what other people think. This is all great stuff.
I feel like we need part two.
I think we do. I think we do need part two.
We can't just leave them here.
I got it.
Okay.
But starting what I said before, to Olga's point, really getting to a place of being able to check your privilege and also move through your unconscious bias is about having these types of conversations, exposing yourselves to difference, acknowledging people's difference, but also just having open dialogue. So
we may need to just keep this class because I feel like we have to do a part two. Can you pause here? We need to pause here. That's a question.
Who's talking? Because can't hear them.
Should we pause? Because she's talking in the background, trying to lead the presentation.
I am not.
Should we pause here because it's 2:00? But should we move through? Because I would like to move through.
Here's what I'd like to offer. I'd like for you to wrap it up like with a bow, just like you said, to kind of give an understanding. And then I'd like for next week to move around some things and perhaps bring some type of conversation for part two, or I don't know, let's talk about it. But with everyone, for show of thumbs up or in the chat room, if there's a part two that you all would like to kind of get into, please let us know. If not, then I think maybe it would maybe a one-on. Okay, I'm seeing. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
More part two. This is good. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So should I wrap so I can move through this presentation and end it out?
Go for it. I actually I have a hard stop at 2:05.
Okay.
There's another team for growth that needs
to. Okay.
Is it possible for you to, never mind.
Viral video of high school boys surrounding Native American activist Nathan Phillips, who stoically beat his drum, caused outrage. But a different video surfaced Sunday that showed what happened before the encounter.
You little dirty crackers, your day coming. Your day coming.
When a radical group of protesters called Black Hebrew Israelites taunted the boys for more than an hour with racist and homophobic abuse.
A bunch of child molesting.
And it was Phillips who approached the boys, not as it first appeared, the other way around. He walked among the group as they appeared to chant to his drum beats. Phillips said he believed he had to do something to protect the Black Israelites group from the boys, some of whom wore Make America Great Again hats. Student Nick Sandman said the boys did not shout racial epithets. Sandman was shown in the first video standing close to Phillips as Phillips continues to beat his drum. In a statement, Sandman says he never interacted with Phillips. To be honest, I was startled and confused as to why he had approached me. We'd already been yelled at by another group of protesters, and when the second group approached, I was worried that a situation was getting out of control.
So this would be an example of the fourth area of discrimination or bias, which is ideological racism. And the definition of that essentially is things that we've consumed subconsciously, consciously by way of media, news, education, so on and so forth. And it really shapes how not only we see ourselves, but how we see other individuals. And so in this case, I played a news clip of which then provided context through the lens of the journalist in this regard and the news channel, which then painted the picture to be however they painted the picture. Oftentimes without context though, you may use this as your form of information to understand, again, how to see certain groups. But I showed clips also leading up to this that then allowed for everyone to form their opinions, of which it seemed I heard a mixed bag of, you know, everyone is the victim. Most people were saying that the indigenous Americans were the victim more times often than not. At some points, it was that the Black Hebrew Israelites were the victim, but then when you look at it from a different perspective, it's the white, you know, Caucasian teens that were the victim. And so everyone essentially started to change their position based on the perspective. But when you look at the news clip, they positioned one group a particular way, and if that is your only point of reference, oftentimes that can be damaging as it relates to how the story is understood, especially if it's pointed toward or skews in the favor of a particular group. And so that ends up leading to perception, which at the end of the day, understanding how racism manifests is largely a game of perception. And I use game not to say that it is one, but to say that oftentimes it will skew itself to lend, you know, itself to favor in those favor in the to lend itself to the favor of being more of a privilege to others as opposed to another. And that's in any form of ism, although we're talking about race in this regard. And so this is the last clip I'll show.
Some students harassing an older Native American man, a Vietnam vet, in the midst of a special ceremony.
It does look like that young man to me is taunting the Native American Vietnam vet.
This face-to-face confrontation igniting charges of racism.
The kid, Nick Sandman, he doesn't seem to be afraid, but he did make a choice, and that was to make it into a standoff. That was not a good choice.
Student Nick Sandman has scored a legal win after being smeared by the media. CNN has settled a $250 million defamation suit Sandman filed. It's over a confrontation with the Native American man that made the teenager look like the aggressor.
So this event played out in the world. Everyone in this conversation saw that there were various different victims and villains depending on how you looked at it. However, the news painted one group to be the victim, quote unquote, more so than the other. So as we move through the system, although everyone at some point had some sense of aggression or discrimination pointed at them, the only group that seemingly benefited financially in this regard was the one of the teens that won a $250 million settlement because their name and their character was slandered. very interesting in that regard. And so I come back to the question of, can Black people be racist? And although we're not going to do the poll anymore, I will say, and the point of today's conversation was really to identify and talk about the act of racism versus the system of racism.
Julius.
Yes.
Can this be the cliffhanger? And I'll tell you why.
Okay.
So many of them had to leave because they're having to meet.
Okay.
And I feel like this is where we are right now, because I think this is you're about to make the point, right? You're about to make a point, and other people have still their opinions based off of this. So I think this is a larger conversation. By a show in the chat room, would this be the good cliffhanger that we can now kind of marinate and come back to? Or would you want to hear him? Because I actually have to jump as well. So I really want to hear this. Chat room's not lighting up, which lets me know that we've lost some. Okay, people.
We can save it. We can save it.
Right.
Good.
We got marinate.
Save, marinate. Okay. All right. Next Wednesday then. We'll
okay. All right.
Thank
All right,
you,
everybody. Listen, like I said in the chat room, and I'm going to let you finish, but this is a very serious topic, and it's a heavy topic. And it's one in which we definitely felt during this time was something that we need to talk to together, because I feel like we have at this point spent 6 weeks with one another. We're getting to know one another. And I feel like there's a bond somewhere here. So this is not to isolate anyone, quite to the contrary. This is to bring us together and be able to have these conversations. So from there, I say adieu. And I will see you all next Wednesday. Everyone else can stay on. I gotta leave. Actually, I'll just put you on mute.
No, we can go.
Okay. All right, you gone? You got one last thing to say?
Nope, cliffhanger. I'll see y'all next week.
Julius?
Yep, I'm here.
Julius left.
No,
and the
I'm
building
here.
is out. All right, everybody. Listen, we'll see you on Wednesday. Next Wednesday. All righty.